The following episode of Beyond the Checkbox features a discussion about suicide and suicidal ideation. If you or someone you know is experiencing a mental health crisis, you can call or text 988 in the United States, and in Canada, call 1-833-456-4567.
Hey folks, welcome to Beyond the Checkbox. I'm your host, Ryan Todd. On this show, we learn about organizational mental health. And we typically learn through frontline leaders in mental health and business leaders, organizational leaders, nonprofit leaders, government leaders across the world who are passionate about mental health like you and I are. And on today's show, we have a gentleman named Vince Hafeli. He's, I think, about to be Dr. Vince Hafeli, because as I understand it, he's finishing his PhD dissertation. Vince is the president of an organization called Ajax Paving. It's a large construction company. And I mean, once in a while you run into someone, and we were lucky enough to have him on the show, where they have such a powerful story. It is gripping and teaches you a lot about stigma around mental health and how we hide mental health, how we hide it for ourselves and lie to ourselves about mental health. Vince has a story where he was very close to ending his own life because of a number of personal tragedies he experienced, so much adversity, and he rose above all that, and he became president of a large construction company, and now he tells his story through TED Talks, through large conferences. He tells it in his own company. This is one of the most powerful podcasts that I've ever done. And I think you can always tell as soon as you're done an interview or a podcast about how good it was, just based on how you feel, how quickly that time went, how engaged you were. And this was one of those where after, we turned the cameras off and I said, damn, this was a powerful story, and this is a special person. Thank you for joining the show and listening in. And I'm looking forward to hearing your feedback on this one, because I found this to be one of the best episodes we've ever recorded. You are listening to Beyond the Checkbox, a podcast that focuses on leading strategies around bringing more mental well-being into the workplace. My name is Ryan Todd. I'm a psychiatrist and the CEO of Adversity. I'm sitting down with industry-leading change makers to break down their process and see how they are going above and beyond for their workforce mental well-being. But I did want to get a little bit of your history with Ajax, because it's a leading organization in terms of mental health and suicide prevention, and you've been passionate about this topic for some time. So how did you come to this? First, the industry, and then how did you come into working in mental health and being an advocate for suicide prevention?
I came to the industry in 1985. I started testing concrete cylinders, working 2 hours a day, making $4.50 an hour. So my paycheck at the end of the week was $45 before taxes. That was my beginning.
2 hours a day?
2 hours a day. That's all they needed. And within about 2 months, I worked myself into a full-time job through hard work. But and then I went on and became a project manager for the Florida Department of Transportation. And then I eventually became a project manager for some engineering firms. And then I landed in Ajax in 2002. They hired me to set up their quality control department here. And about 15 months later, they made me the general manager of the company over all their asphalt operations, plant operations. And then in 2007, I took over as the vice president, and in 2019 became president of Ajax. So that briefly my career. How did we land in mental health and suicide? I guess for me personally, kind of three pieces to the story. One, I'm in the final stages. I have about 10 weeks left to finish up my doctorate degree at the University of South Florida in business. When I went there, I wanted to research frontline leadership in the asphalt industry, how we take a great tradesman and we make them a supervisor and they fail because they have all the hard skills, but they don't have any of the soft skills. And a professor there kind of told me that was weak and lame. It's been done before. Do something different. And I pushed back and continued to challenge him, and he won. So I went home and did a little thinking. I had published a paper for a conference in India, and the hook line in that paper was suicide in the construction industry. That was the hook to get people to want to read all the boring research at the back of the paper. So I talked to him again about that in June of 21, and he said, hey, that would be powerful. So that's where I landed with my dissertation. If we go back about 6 years prior to that, we had lost another employee at Ajax to suicide. It wasn't the first, but it was the most recent. And I was the last individual to see Mark that day. When I left the office, he was sitting in his car. I waved and smiled. He waved and smiled. I drove away. And 3 hours later, I got the phone call that Mark had taken his life.
Wow.
So that was my second piece. And then if I go back to me in 2007, I was going to take my life. I had gotten there through a journey that started back in 1989. And I think it's important for people to hear my story about how I got there, because I've never been an alcoholic. I've never been addicted to drugs. Had never received any type of therapy or counseling other than some marriage counseling in probably 2006. And then actually some therapy counseling in 2021 and 22. But in 1989, in May, I learned that my brother, which was 9 years my senior, that at the time was 36 almost, was terminally ill. And 2 months later, I lost my father in July of 89. And then in November and December of 89, my wife and I lost twin sons.
Wow.
So, a lot of stuff happened in a short period. And I did what a man my age that grew up in the 60s and 70s was told to do. I was tough, strong, macho, hid my feelings, didn't talk about my emotions. And that's also what we're coached to do in the construction industry. Be tough, be strong, don't show any weakness. I remember standing outside my father's funeral and telling friends and family that, hey, Dad's better off. He's no longer in pain or suffering. And my goodness, he was 59 years old. He had lived a full life. And, at the age of 27, I thought 59 was old. Now that I'm almost 61, I don't feel like 59 is old anymore. But that's what I told people. And that's not how I really felt.
How did you feel?
On the inside, I was devastated. I don't know if I've ever had any heroes in my life, but if I did, my father was probably the closest thing I ever had to a hero. I pretty much worshipped him, not because he was a rich man, because he wasn't, not because he was a highly educated man, because he wasn't. He was just a good, blue-collar, hardworking, coal mining, great sportsman when he was younger, person that would do anything and everything for his family. And he would fight for his family if that's what it took. He was kind of a hero. So, so that happens in 89, and then in 93, on my niece's 5th birthday, that's my brother and daughter, he passed on her birthday early in the morning. So, hey, we smiled and continued to have a birthday party for Brittany that same day. And then we soon learned that my mother was terminally ill with a form of cancer, and I lost her. So by the age of 33, everyone that was my family that was close to me was gone. And my family was very close. We grew up, the four of us, with horseback riding, motorcycle riding, ski boats. I mean, we were very close. So now I'm 33. Everyone is gone. I don't talk about that to anyone, not even my wife at the time. I didn't share any of my emotions or feelings. And if you fast forward up in the mid 2005 or so, the marriage starts struggling, and the marriage eventually failed. But in 2007, after another great day at work, because my career was on a trajectory upward. In 2007, I became vice president of Ajax, and in 2007 was also the year I was going to take my life. Because professionally, I felt like a rock star. Personally, I felt like a failure in every way of my life. Even though I had great kids at the time and still have great kids, I felt like everything I did personally was wrong. I didn't feel like I met anyone's expectations, including my own. So come home from work, sit down to have dinner, and something was said or something happened. I don't recall. And I get up from the table and I walked and got in my truck and drove away, and was driving down Gene Green Road here, leading into the office where I'm sitting at today. And I was going behind our asphalt plant back here to take my life. And I received a telephone call that said, "We know where you're going. We know what you're going to do. And your son is on his way."
Who sent that? How did they know where you were going?
My wife at the time. When I left the house, I mean, she figured out where I was going and what I was going to do. So I got that call, and I did what my dad told me to do. I was tough. I was strong. I laughed. I joked. I said, "Hey, I'm out for a ride. I'll be home." And I turned around and went home. Went to bed and got up the next day and went to work like nothing ever happened. And for 14 years, from 2007 until 2021, the only people that knew of that night, or that I thought that knew, was my son, which at the time was 17 or 18, and what would eventually become my ex-wife. So now I've got all that luggage from 89. I got that luggage from 2007 that I've never talked to anyone about. And when the professor challenged me on to do something, more difficult than what I wanted to originally do, that's how I landed on suicide. And then that's when I eventually began talking about it.
And did you kind of like, I don't want to say repress it, like you didn't, like you kind of just forgot about it for 14 years. You kind of just laughed it off or buried it, or like, were you thinking about it still over that course of 14 years?
No, I never forgot about it. I mean, there were periods in there where I went to dark places again on lows. But a lot of good things happened, which I'll hit on in a second. But I think it's important that people understand that, I came to Ajax in 2002. And in 2003, I walked into the then president's office. And I told him, when you're ready to be done, I want to be president of the company. So now it's 2007. I've just become vice president. I'm struggling with wanting to take my life. So there's no way I'm going to tell him where I'm at. Because if I can't manage me, how can I manage several hundred people? So out of fear of what it would do to my career, I didn't tell him. Out of an embarrassment of what my peers would think, I didn't tell them. So yeah, you asked what happened the next 14 years. What happened the next 14 years is a lot of great things. I remarried to what has become my best friend, and we've now been married for 14 years. I go on, and that period, I sign up and complete 11 full Ironman races.
Wow.
So what was important about those is there's a lot of Saturdays where you go on a 6-hour bicycle ride and you're riding 110 miles. So it keeps your mind busy. It kept me from thinking about those, but it didn't fix any of my issues. It just covered my issues up, because again, there would be periods to where I would sit in the backyard in the middle of the night and think, I live in the country, so it's quiet. And there's nothing at night but owls and coyotes and an occasional cow in the distance. And I would sit there and think, God, in the end, will it really be this peaceful? Will it be this calm? Is this what the afterlife is?
Yeah, I want to dig into that because there's so few individuals who can articulate what those thoughts are like at that moment when you're thinking about actually dying. So what are you thinking about's the next step? What are you thinking about afterlife? What are you thinking about death? Or does it matter because you're so done with what's going on in your day to day?
Back in 2007, when I originally thought about it, I had this strategic plan of why it was the right thing to do for others.
A strategic plan.
Yeah, I had, and I've been coached that you shouldn't really talk about your why, because others, it may give them the same thoughts as you did, and it may encourage them to take their life. I just had reasons why I thought everybody else would be better off without me, to the point to where I almost felt like I was going to be this samurai warrior falling on a sword to benefit everyone around me because I was such a failure.
It was a sacrifice for the betterment of other people.
Exactly, yes. And those nights when I would sit and think about that again, hey, I'm not going to tell you that I'm a holy religious person. I'm not going to tell you that, hey, I go to church every Sunday. In fact, I haven't been for several years. I've been saved. But I'll also tell you that when I went through all the tragic losses in the 80s and 90s, that I went through a long period in my life where I said, hey, there can be no God, because if there is, he wouldn't do that to someone. And if he did do that to me, that's not anyone I want to be associated with. That's where I was at. That's the honest answer. I can also tell you that I sat in this same office here 3 years ago with an employee that was going to take his life, and another gentleman in the room. And he went on to tell me that, hey, there is an almighty being, and the reason you're here is because he put you through all that in the 80s and 90s, so you could sit here today with this young man that's telling you that he's going to take his life so that you can talk to him about your struggles and how you pulled through. And that young man now, like I said, we're 3 years down the road, and he's no longer with the company. He went on to do something different, and his life has improved. So, hey, maybe that is why all that happened to me. I don't know. But, I don't know if I really ever wanted to die. And the honest answer, there's Kevin Hines. I think Hines is his last name. He jumped off the Golden Gate Bridge. And on his way to the bridge that morning, he said, all I want is one person to make me feel like I should be here. I want one person to say hello. And he never had that on the way to the bridge that morning. And as he jumped off the Golden Gate Bridge and his hand let go, the last thing that went through his mind, he said, was, I don't want to die. But he's already leaped. And most people that leap off the Golden Gate Bridge don't survive, but Kevin did. And so he's now a speaker and travels, and he talks about that. And, in all honesty, I think probably that night when I was driving to do that, I kind of had the same thought. I hope somebody calls. And they did. Um,
You think if she didn't, you wouldn't be here?
oh, I'm pretty confident I wouldn't be here. I had everything with me to do what was going to happen, and yeah, I was just ready for peace. I was tired of the pain and anguish. I was tired of hurting. I was tired of feeling like a failure. In my research in my doctoral program, I interviewed um, people that had lost someone in their family or a coworker, and I interviewed a woman in Orlando. And during the interview, I made the comment to her that, they say suicide is probably the most selfish act that a person can do. And she quickly put me in my place. She said, "Don't ever tell me my son was selfish, because my son was not selfish. He had tried for years. He had gone through counseling for years. He had moved back home. He tried everything he could. My son was in so much pain that the only way that he knew to make the pain end was to take his life." And when she said that, I thought to myself, my goodness, me of all people should know that feeling.
And you were asking her that you were saying, I've heard, or some research suggests, or there's kind of a feeling that suicide is selfish, and she quickly corrected you, I guess.
She very quickly corrected me. Um,
Yeah. It is interesting because I've lost patients to suicide, and my first reaction was very strong and negative, and feeling the guilt and shame as working with them with their physician. And I did have that feeling like, damn them, in a way, right? And it's horrible to admit, but I felt like, man, that was so selfish of you. Like, all the work we did together. And of course, I'm just thinking of myself in that moment. But that's interesting to hear that mother say that, right? That it was what that person had perceived as their only way out of that really uh, enormous amount of pain. Like that's the only way to treat it, in a way, is what they felt.
yeah, and when she said that, like I said, I went back to that night and thought, God, how could have I ever said what I just said? Because that's exactly where I was. Um, Worked for a great company, had a great job, um, had a boat at the time, had a home that was 5 years old, um, had just completed a master's degree a few years earlier. I mean, when I give talks, I take people on a journey through my life, starting at the age of 7, with photos up until the age of 60. And I tell them that, I said, I think most people, if they were standing with their child and was looking at me and that story, would say, God, if you could grow up to be like anyone, that man's had a great life. He's there was a lot of struggles in there, but nobody sees them because I never talked about them. So there's 5 takeaways I give people in my talk, and the last takeaway I give people in my talk is sometimes people look and behave just like me. Sometimes there's all these lists of signs that you're going to see for people, but sometimes people, if they're smart enough, like I was, I think cover up most of those signs, and people don't know. So I think it's important for people to know, and I mean, you can agree or disagree, that's fine, is that I get a lot of people calling me from the industry saying, I have this happening, what can I do? And one of the first things I do to them is I tell them, the first thing you got to recognize is we can't save everyone. So if something happens, you can't be riddled with guilt and shame because you tried and was unsuccessful. But you can be riddled with guilt and shame if you had an idea and you didn't do anything.
That's an interesting message. Yeah, because it's so, as you know, you've seen in your research, it is very unpredictable. And I mean, look at your colleague, the gentleman, I think his name was Mark, 3 hours before, waved and smiled like that. that you had no idea, right? And I wonder, did you feel the guilt and shame after that? Like, could I have done something? Did I miss something? Like, I imagine you were feeling some of those same things.
I didn't, because there was a long stretch there in my life, and that was part of it, where death meant absolutely nothing to me. People are born, people are die, and something happens in between. And the fact that people die, I don't know what to tell you. It's just a fact of life. I became very cold to death, and to this day, I am still somewhat cold to death. Someone asked me on my 60th birthday down the hallway here, what was your worst birthday? And I said, I haven't had one yet. They said, 40 didn't bother you? I said, well, no. 50 didn't bother you? I said, hey, when I turned 50, I went to an Ironman racing. I started when I was 48, and I had more income coming in. I was more stable, so life went good. They said, well, what about 60? And I said, well, God, I'm more near the end, more near retirement, can go on. I'll enjoy the next phase of life. And I said, probably maybe the biggest reason why age doesn't bother me, I said, because I have no fear of death. Death means nothing to me. Everyone in my family died in a short period. I've been right there on the edge. And I told him, I said, hey, I'm not telling you that's a healthy state of mind. I'm not telling you that's a healthy place to be. In fact, it's probably not healthy. You probably know better than me. But hey, that's the honest answer of where I was. So yeah, did Mark bother me? I mean, I don't want to be completely cold. Yeah, it did. Mark and I weren't that close, so maybe that was a piece of it. He was the office clown. He was the office comedian. Nobody had a clue. And what did Robin Williams said something along the lines of most comedians create laughter and try to make other people happy because they don't want other people to be as sad and pain as they are on the inside. So yeah, I mean, hey, Mark bothered me, but it didn't devastate me. And hey, criticize me, do whatever you want. I mean, that's where I was in my life at the time.
And when you're talking about to people in the industry, like, it sounds a bit obvious. It's truism. Suicide is an issue around death. And so the topic of death comes up. Do you talk about death and how you think about it, or your cold emotions toward it, as you stated? Or do you get into that sort of stuff with people?
I do, maybe not every time. It depends on the groups that I'm talking to. Yeah, I mean, I have told the story to other people that I've just mentioned to you about my coldness toward that and my belief of God. Why would you want a God like that? And I mean, I've shared that. I've become a pretty open book. If my best friend says I'm totally amazed because you're not who you were 2 years ago.
2 years ago. So this transformation has been relatively, I guess, even in recent for you.
Yeah. He said, you're not, he said, you were always the person in the office that nobody knew anything about you because you didn't want people to know anything about you. And suddenly you're out talking. So, I think it's important for people that are struggling to hear this. Prior to me, and maybe let me say this too. When I decided to do this, I started a qualitative research class in November 2 at the university. A professor, Dr. Jennifer Wogemuth, introduced me to qualitative research, of which I knew nothing about. And so I asked her to meet me at a coffee shop in December, and we did. And she told me more about it. I told her the research I wanted to do. And she said, I'm going to ask you to make one commitment, and I will help you. She said, I'll help you even if you don't, but I'm going to ask you to go find a therapist to talk to, because this is going to be a deep topic. You're going to be interviewing a lot of people, it's going to weigh on you. So I did twice, and then I didn't go anymore. It was an online, It wasn't right. But then a year later, when I really began doing the interviews, I did go back and talk to a therapist again. Prior to me beginning this research, on a good night, I slept 3 hours. I go to bed at 10 o'clock, and by 10:05, I was sound asleep, and by 10:30, I was up, and I would go sit out back until 2, 3, 4 in the morning, and then go back to bed and sleep an hour or two. Once I finally started talking to people about my life and the struggles I had been through and got all this out in the open. I mean, I just got up this morning and told my wife, I said, okay, do you realize we went to bed at 10:30 last night? And I said, I didn't wake up one time until 5 o'clock, not even to go to the restroom, 7 hours straight through. And that's a typical night anymore. Since I've confessed, I've just got it off of my chest. And I feel so powerful and enlightened to be helping other people here in my organization and across the country.
Oh, it's so powerful. Like, your story is so gripping, and it's what I find it so, the part that is so interesting to me, amongst a lot of things that I want to dive deeper into, is that there's such a difficult balance, I think, with executives. And you've had a great career, and now you're at the top of that large, important organization. And we talk about authentic leadership, and you hear about this, and then you also hear from leaders like, yeah, but it's tough to share too much because people want a steadfast leader who has no issues themselves. And this, you're showing extreme vulnerability. And so I want to get your take on that. Like, has it hurt your career, your company? Has it helped it? Like, how would you coach others to be extremely vulnerable? Because I think your message is so powerful. Like the folks at Ajax must be as inspired as kind of we are, enlightened as we are, to speak out themselves and be more vulnerable themselves. So the kind of the entry point into that for me is, does it hurt your career? Does it create new challenges for you? I mean, you're obviously happy you did it, but what are is there a downside to being as extremely vulnerable as you have?
I've talked in person to over 7,000 people since January. And I've made numerous posts on LinkedIn since November. I've had one gentleman say something negative out of all that. At our organization, I'll tell you, January 3rd, 2022, 8 o'clock in the morning, I stood in front of 400 people and said, we're going to begin addressing mental health and suicide. I've been there before, and we're going to change the culture of the company. That was to the company as a whole. July 16th of 2021, at a weekly meeting here at the company, I was telling 16 of the key leaders in the organization that on that January 3rd, we were going to begin addressing this. And for whatever reason that day, I have no idea why, that's the first time I ever told anyone about that night in 2007. I told those 16 people. I looked them in the eyes. I told them. I even told 2 of the people that were in the room. On that day in 2007, there were 4 letters on my desk. These were my goodbye letters. These were my thank you letters. There was one for you, and there was one for you. These were my letter because I wanted you to know that you had in no way failed me. You had done nothing wrong. I didn't want you to guilt with the first. And then on January 3rd, in front of the whole group, I did that. And by 6 o'clock in that evening, I began receiving emails, telephone calls, and texts from employees. One email I received in particular said, you know, that I've had a superintendent on my job, and I have thought for months that he'd been struggling, but I didn't know if I could talk to him, or should I talk to him, or how do I talk to him. And on the way today from leaving the safety meeting, we talked, and he decided he's going to go get some help. And by the way, I've realized I need to get some too, so I'm going to. July, that superintendent came up at our mid-year safety meeting, and he told me, what you did on January 3rd saved both my career and my marriage. You've turned my life around. Got an email after a webinar I did from another lady that said that, I've lost several family members to suicide. I once stopped my mother, and I've often thought about it. And suddenly, after hearing your story and realizing that if it can happen to someone like you, I no longer have to live in shame of my family. I no longer have to be shameful of what's happened. So you've changed my life. I told you earlier in the podcast, I didn't want the president of the company to know at the time. So we're in a peer group in West Palm Beach in January, February of 22. And one of the contractors in the room, there was 8 contractors total. He wanted to talk about 2 employees that he lost in 21 to suicide. And one of the gentlemen in the room leaned over into my ear, and he said, "The people are all crazy, they're bipolar, they're wired wrong at birth, something's wrong with anyone that would do something like this." Well, it kind of hit me wrong. So I said, time out, stop the meeting. I'm going to tell you a story. I'm going to tell you a story that not even the owner of the company knows, because now what used to be the president, now the CEO. So he's the owner, he's in the room, he doesn't know. And I said, I'm going to tell you this story. And I thought, well, this will probably be the last day I work for Ajax, because once he hears this, he probably won't want me to be the president anymore. So I told the story. The meeting ended. We walked out of the room. We're walking down the corridor at the breakers over in West Palm toward the elevator, and he put his arm around me, and he said, "That was powerful. That was strong. I'm proud of you for what you just did." So I tell people everything that I thought would happen when I began to talk about my struggles, just the opposite has happened. People, I did a proclamation signing event in Orlando on February 7th of this year with 1,900 people in the room. And I invited high, powerful individuals, Ward Nye, the CEO of Martin Marietta Materials here in the U.S., Jamie Rouse, the general manager of Dynapack Americas, John Deere, some international contractors, some national contractors, a representative from the Construction Industry Alliance for Suicide Prevention. I had all these people on the stage with me, and we signed a proclamation. A 30-minute talk, 1,900 people, not one person left the room. There were tears in the room, and there were phone calls for weeks afterwards from people saying thank you.
What was the proclamation about that? I've heard a little bit about it.
I had this idea from my research. There's all these documented reasons why people take their lives. Alcohol addiction or job insecurity. I mean, there's just all these reasons. But what my research told me, in my industry, in construction, we're the second highest industry in the U.S. when it comes to suicides. My research told me that in all my interviews, you can't fix what you don't know is broken. And none of these industry leaders know we have a problem. None of them know that suicide is an issue. A lot of them know that they've had suicide in their organization, but they just think it's their organization. So I had this idea, God, what if I did this proclamation and had a bunch of industry leaders sign it and make a pledge to say that we will no longer not accept not addressing mental health and suicide awareness in our organizations. We'll encourage open conversations about it. And then what if I could get 700,000 people to sign the thing by the end of 2024? And then I could take the document with all these signatures and show the industry, here's the data that supports it's a problem. Here's all these signatures from leaders that have said they will address the problem. And here's these hopefully hundreds of thousands of signatures from your workers saying we want you to address the problem. So that's what the proclamation was. Hey, well, I get 700,000 signatures. I don't know. Maybe I won't get 7,000. I don't know. But, it's on 2 websites, and people ask me, how many do you have now? And I don't ask them, because people want the metrics, and I haven't asked. I mean, that's the honest answer. I can't tell you. I mean, I can tell you I spoke to a company last Friday here in Bradenton, Florida, and nearly 100 of their employees signed it. There's not been anyone that has said, "Whoa, that's not for me." So, I mean, it was my idea, and it's still my idea, just to get people to understand this. I mean, I've spoken Indiana, Illinois, Iowa, Oklahoma, Louisiana, Alabama. I'm going to Virginia, South Carolina, Texas, all across the U.S. about the topic, and haven't been asked to be paid a penny. So I'm not out on a motivational speaking tour charging $10,000 a talk. Ajax is buying me a plane ticket and getting me a hotel room and paying my salary to go and do it. So I'm doing it because my research at USF, my lived experience, this has created a passion for me that I have never felt in my entire life. A passion to help change people.
It's so powerful. And I do a lot of speaking on this topic, but I'm coming at it from a clinical place, and I don't think I have near the effect of your genuine, authentic story. And the other piece that I think is so important is I want to figure out a way to get really low cost kind of tools into the hands of the industry leaders, because they have to be, because it's not like a high margin industry. And so I'm still figuring that out and trying to think of ways to do that. And I think it'd be, I would like your advice on that, because you've been in these massive rooms. You've gripped people the way that you've gripped me today. And I think the impact that you could have is phenomenal. We had one so with our technology, there's a very simple tool on it, right? On the app, that you hit the button and you can talk to a certified crisis worker. And one of our construction companies, not last quarter, but 2 quarters ago, 25 people hit that button. And I felt like that made it worth it. Like the whole damn ordeal made it worth it. And I just want to figure out a low cost way to get that to that many people, because you're right. I don't want this to be seen as like a money making thing. The industry demands better than that. And there's I see a lot of patients who are from construction and oil and gas and manufacturing, like kind of blue collar industry. And there's this triad of things that I talk about that are going on with pain. I think that's physical and emotional and maybe spiritual pain, and this kind of macho industry, and then substances. And you put all those things, 3 things together, and I think you get a lot of people taking their lives. And I was really interested to hear you say that there's not a awareness of it. And you're right, like you nailed it. It's like leaders see it in their own company. They're like, oh, we had a mark last year and it was horrible for the company. And then no one talks about it. So it's not well known as a greater industry issue. And I've been searching for some of the whys as to when I did a talk in California last week, and then I was in Chicago the week before. and I'll get a decent room of, 50 or 100 people. And I think I'm trying to figure out where the next level of impact is. And I think you have it, right? It's someone who is a CEO who has gone from the bottom of the organization to the top, showing extreme vulnerability, and that you're passionate around it is just infectious. So I don't know where to take that, but I think there's something there that is really, really powerful in terms of how you talk about it. I'm not surprised that you've had such, I don't want to say traction and talk about the metrics, but you've had such a movement behind you on this.
Well, most leaders will tell you they care about their people. And I would tell you some do more than others. So let's just say they all do, but some do a lot more than others.
Yeah, I don't as much. And my studio team would tell you that too.
But I told some of the guys and talks, and I mean, it sounds bad to say this. Look, if you don't care about doing it because you care about people, do it from a business perspective.
Just do it because of the ROI. Yeah.
McDonald's can't hire people. Ajax, I mean, everybody's struggling to hire people in today's world, right? And this is a bad way to say it. It'll give you a competitive advantage over the guy down the street, because particularly younger people want to work for organizations that care. They want to work for organizations that want to hear them and understand their struggles. And these leaders that I refer to, this is when I was younger, you only really had to lead like 2 generations. And then it became 3, and then it became 4. And I mean, I don't know how many generations we're reading. We have baby boomers, we got millennials, we got Zs and Ys. And so I'm trying to educate some of these leaders that you got to, I challenge people. If you're a 40-year-old leader, find someone every week to have lunch with that's 25, or not every week, but once a month, and find someone once a month to have lunch with that's 55. And listen to what the baby boomer, what those conversations sound like, or I guess 55, maybe millennials now. And listen to what is important to the 25-year-olds. And you got to learn to lead across all these generations. And whether it's workplace safety or whether it's mental health, you may have to deal with the 55 or 60-year-old different than you deal with the 25-year-old something. So I think great leaders, and hey, I'm no way saying I'm a great leader, so don't think I'm saying that. I think great leaders have to work harder today to be attuned to their workforce than they did 20 or 30 years ago. Because when I first got into the workforce, people led with a stick. I mean, they hit you, they yelled at you, and I say hit you in jest, but sometimes they did, because that's just the way they did. It was the old black and white movies you see of manufacturing and the tough conditions, and that's not today's world. And mental health, I mean, companies need, I mean, I know you have your program that you're working on, but I heard something yesterday. They said, isn't it weird that you can have cancer and they'll pay for unlimited visits for chemotherapy, I guess, until you reach a maximum or something. Yet if you're having a mental issue, hey, we'll give you 6 visits. Yeah, why don't they just give you 6 chemotherapies? And hey, if it hasn't worked out by then, hey, I'm sorry. I tell people 2 years ago, I hurt my shoulder. And when I told people, hey, I went and saw a surgeon, and he said, you don't need surgery, you need a physical therapist. So go get some physical therapy. And, it was high fives and claps and thumbs up. Great, you don't have to have surgery. Yet when I told people, hey, Dr. Wogemuth wants me to see a counselor, I didn't know. That's viewed as terrible. And it shouldn't be. We shouldn't. I tell people in my talks when I go around, if there's mental health and there's mental illness. When I interviewed these executives, I asked them, when I say mental health, what comes to mind? The first thing that they said was nothing. They didn't know what to say. And then they said, well, it is anxiety, it's depression, it's bipolar. And so I would finish the interview and then I would say, okay, recording's off. Now I want to go back to mental health question I ask you. What you gave me was not mental health. You described some mental illness. Mental health should be viewed as a positive thing, just like physical health and viewed as a positive thing. Back when I was doing all those Ironman and was physically fit to the nth degree, I felt like a Greek god. I mean, I was just physically strong. When I injured my shoulder, now I'm a little more physically less. And I tell people, if you tell me that you've never had any mental illness in your life, you're lying to me and yourself. And I said, and if you haven't, you will. Because I said, if you've lost a job, you've had to have had some anxiety. If you've lost a father or a mother or a child or a high school classmate, you've had to have had some depression. If you've been stuck on the interstate in California, you've had to have had some anger. So those are all pieces. And I'm not giving the clinical terms here like you could, but to me, those are all pieces of mental illness. And mental illness, just like physical illness or injury, goes from a 0 to a 10. A 10, you maybe need to be medicated and really worked with on the mental illness spectrum. And maybe if you're a 1, you just need to talk to your pastor. Maybe if you're a 3, you need to talk to your close brother. So the mental illness, we have to remove the notation that when you say mental health, it's a bad thing, because we want people to be mentally healthy. It's a good thing. It's not a bad thing. And I tell people in my industry that we talk about safety every day. So we give you a hard hat, we give you safety goggles, we give you steel toe boots, and we do all that. And we never ask you how you're mentally doing. And you may be mentally struggling terrible because of something just happened. And we think when we put all this physical stuff on you and go out there, you won't get injured. We should have discussed mental health 80 years ago instead of physical safety. We should have got the mental piece before we did the physical piece, because I can give you all the pieces in the world, but if your mind's not here, you ever driven down the interstate and you're on your phone, hands-free like we're supposed to be, and suddenly you don't know where the last 20 miles went?
Yeah. I've done that.
Or you missed an exit? It's because your mind's not there. Just like that can be your mind out when you're a flagman directing traffic and you think you've got it on stop, but you don't. And suddenly 2 cars have a head-on collision. Mental health, that's important.
Where do you want to take the movement next, Vince? Where's your gut telling you that this should go?
You know, it's funny. My wife and I were for a walk last night, and I said that sometimes I think, hey, you started this. Maybe you should just now go off into the sunset and let people run with it. And she said, well, who would that be? I said, well, I don't know who it would be. Where do I want it to go? I hope that all these industry leaders that I've talked to and done things with uphold their commitments and they continue to do things. And I continue to communicate with them. I hope that the trade organizations where I go to, that somebody there is doing something. What does it look like for me? Hey, I've got a shelf life here at Ajax, 3, 4, 5 years. I mean, I'm not sure what it is. And when I'm done with that, I've got some finance professors and some industrial organizational psychology professors that are retired at USF. And we've talked about maybe going out and studying not just construction, but looking at training that we can do in an organization to help them better understand things that they can do as an organization to make the lives of their employees better. Things along finances or just things along life skills that when I went to school in the 70s, we had to take a class and learn to balance a budget. We had to learn how to fill out a check. I think that's missing in education today. And a lot of people come into our workforce and they just don't have a thorough understanding of how to make their life work. So maybe that's the next piece of my life and getting out and trying to help and educate through organizations how to make the lives of their employees better so they don't go to dark places.
Awesome. This has been really, this is, I don't want to say unexpected because I didn't really know what to expect, right? You sometimes talk to CEOs and they're pretty down the fairway in terms of how they approach a conversation and prepared. And this was really gripping for me. So, and I know that it's not always like, I imagine every time you talk about these things, it takes a little chunk of energy and sometimes a big chunk of energy. So I'm deeply appreciative of you taking us through your journey, opening up this journey 2 or 3 years ago in the way that you have. It's going to help thousands of people. And I'm super energized and inspired by what you bring. So thank you so much for joining us. And, I'm going to bug you. I'm going to keep in touch so we can, especially on this financial literacy thing. I think there's so much that we could learn to make this a really excellent, really scalable program to really help people. So yeah, I'm really appreciative to have met you and to take time today. So thanks for coming on the show today, Vince.
All right. Well, thank you. And hey, whatever I can do to help you.
That's awesome. Okay. Have a great day. And I'm sure it'll have a huge impact on executives, frontline people, anyone who's struggling. This is a really incredible example of how it can be done. So thank you.